Are here.
Ha! When you wrap this one up, we're going to hit another interview down here.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
No, we have it now. No, it's ours now. After this,
I said after.
Where do you guys want me to look? Just try to pick
Right
up.
into this one.
All right, I got it. All right.
So John, we're about halfway through the 30th anniversary year. There's been a lot of big moments, a lot of celebrating and everything. Try to put in context like what this year has been like so far and what it kind of means to the company.
Well, it's been pretty wild, right? We've gotten back to the international flair with a lot of the pay-per-views. It began in Rio. We found ourselves in Perth and then to London. So for me, I think that's my biggest takeaway from 2023 is that we are now once again not just extending our tentacles internationally, but bringing the big shows back to these major markets that really can support it. You know, we're going to Sydney obviously in September, so it's a huge year for the UFC. And obviously, there have been a lot of great moments so far, and plenty more where that came from here over the next several months.
Saturday excluded, as some people might see this after the fights happen. What are you looking forward to most the rest of the year?
Well, I am a native Bostonian, so it's hard for me to not center on August 19th, UFC 292 in Boston, Massachusetts. There's so many different interesting storylines leading into that pay-per-view. Chief among them, the champion Aljamain Sterling is still battling injuries. I saw him at the UFC PI yesterday, and this is not at all happening on his terms, and it's just a very interesting storyline leading up to that main event. So I do have my eyes on UFC 292. I think we're all fascinated to see exactly what the headlining act is going to be for UFC 293 in Sydney, but it's just exciting to be in this sport at this point in time. You know, oftentimes people say to me, oh, you know, Conor McGregor and Ronda are gone. When's the next superstar coming through the door? They emerge all the time. And even my man Chepe Mariscal a few weeks ago. So I'm obviously excited. I have my dream job. I'm just trying to hold it down.
We just heard George St. Pierre announce he's coming back in December for a grappling match. As a fan, who would you like to see him take on the most?
It's a great question. I actually just saw him backstage, and I said, I think I'm more excited to hear you on a microphone actually going through that exercise, because I think he has a lot of value on the microphone. When you hear George St. Pierre at a Q&A, there's just so much you can extract from even his short answers. He's just a very thoughtful guy. As for an opponent, it's a great question. You know, there are a lot of willing and able grapplers out there. I don't know, maybe Sugar Sean O'Malley. How about that? He's competed before, Quintet Ultra against Gilbert Melendez, was very competitive, a little bit of a size discrepancy. Sugar Sean O'Malley, George St. Pierre, under the lights in December, UFC Fight Pass Invitational. Let's go.
And just last thing, we saw John Jones and Israel Adesanya kind of making peace last night. That's all over the place. What did you just think of that? And was that welcome for you to see?
Absolutely, right? I mean, certainly as a commentator, when you're calling fights in a broad sense, you like there to be heat and friction on a fight. Promotionally, I think it's easier to build. And I think just as a sports fan, you like some of that heat. But I have softened in my advanced age, now 45 years old, and that triggered my emotions. Just to see two guys that maybe verbally have said things about each other in the past that weren't ideal, to see them bury the hatchet and have that moment, two of the greatest of all time, that was pretty sweet to see.
I have to ask you, this is around the red carpet. Who's Mike over that call that obviously Rory and Rob is going to the They still have to fight you. Which one would you?
Probably Matt Brown against Eric Silva in Cincinnati in 2014. Now, I love that fight between Antonio Bigfoot Silva and Mark Hunt, Brisbane, Australia in 2013, but our matchmaker, Mick Maynard, softly reminded me that Bigfoot popped after the fight, so maybe that one's not getting in the Hall of Fame. But yeah, I mean, I do believe Matt Brown, on the merits of his body of work, could find himself in the modern era wing of the Hall of Fame. But I do think if you're going to take one of Matt Brown's fights and use that as the conduit through which he gets into the Hall of Fame, Matt Brown, Eric Silva in 2014, one of the best fights I've ever called.
Daniel Cormier said Jim Miller might not be a Hall of Fame.
Jim Miller's got a lot more than wins, right? He's got a lot of appearances. He's got a lot of finishes. He's also done it in what I believe is the best division in the UFC, 155 pounds. And they tell me in my line of work that availability is the best ability, and Jim Miller has been available every step of the way. But when you potentially retire as the UFC's all-time wins leader, I absolutely think Jim Miller has a case. You guys know our Hall of Fame's a little bit funky with the 4 different wings. We're going to find a way to get Jim Miller in, DC, if it's the last thing I do.
I know the Hall of Fame was always very special for you. I know you're involved with all these. Where does this class rank amongst some of the other classes in terms of your affinity for them?
So I was very emotional when Daniel Cormier was going in. That was a unique experience for me just because he's my broadcast partner and dear friend. But the athlete that I am most starstruck on this entire roster is Jose Aldo Jr., the King of Rio. He's headlining this class here tonight, and I get anxious around him, right? Still 20 years into this business, I still get anxious around Jose Aldo Jr., so very excited to see him take his rightful place in the Hall of Fame. He'll be dripping with class all the way up there, and of course, Anderson Silva and Cowboy and everybody else. It's a special class to be sure.
And obviously, I mean, you're the beacon of professionalism up there, but have you ever had a moment where you had the emotions of the moment catch you when you're up there ever speaking or you're training these guys? Has there ever been anyone that's kind of choked up at any point?
Well, I actually made the mistake of drinking some freezing cold water backstage before I inducted the fight between Dan Henderson and Shogun Rua. And I'm not encouraging your audience to go to UFC Fight Pass and check this out, but dude, like the music started playing and saved my ass because my vocal cords froze and I couldn't utter the name Dan Henderson. So it's always emotional up there. You know, when I start to talk about Jens Pulver, even in rehearsal, I feel goosebumps coming on my arms. But that Hendo Shogun that moment was an absolute disaster, and yeah, go check it out.
You mentioned Ronda earlier. I'm just curious, there's a lot of people speculating she might come back to UFC, didn't know her to come back at all. Would you encourage that? Do you think her time has passed?
I would encourage it in some part, but I would also be hypocritical if I said to you she should come back and fight for the title just because of this Amanda Nunes vacancy, because in the past, I have said aloud I didn't love that Henry Cejudo got to come back and cut the entire line of all these bantamweight contenders that had been in the gauntlet, that had been in the USADA pool for 3 years, right? So I like a meritocracy, and there are definitely worthwhile contenders, Raquel Pennington and Juliana Pena chief among them. So as a mixed martial arts fan, I get a little bit uneasy when someone comes back having not competed and just cuts the line. But if anyone deserves to cut the line, it's probably Ronda. Thank you, friends.